This one's about real money if you live in California, and something you get to vote on in a week and a half. And I'm going to introduce again the moderator, and then he'll introduce the panelists. This is Dave Sunding. He had the second shortest commute to get here since he works across the street at UC Berkeley. He is the Thomas J. Graff Professor of, in the College of Natural Resources. He's a top-flight economist. He's always writing reports. He gets hired by everybody, and he seems to be able to work for all the different sides without everybody getting annoyed at him, which is a skill that almost nobody can do. And he's going to moderate the panel with these other two distinguished gentlemen. Just to get into a little bit of horse racing parlance, I was thinking about tonight as a daily double of panels, each panel being a trifecta of moderator and two panelists, and this panel certainly fits that description.
Very good. All right. Thank you, Sprague.
Did you just call us a horse?
I think so. Yes.
I wasn't quite sure where to go with that, but yes, I think you did. Sure. Well, we have a great panel, two people who have a lot of knowledge about the California water system, have been at these issues for a very long time. Both went to Cal, right? Is that right? You went to Cal. You went to Cal.
Of course.
I know, of course, right.
Of course,
so
that's why we're here.
That's another trifecta, exactly. So Stewart Wolf is the president and the CEO of Wolf Farming, which is a vertically integrated company doing a whole lot of business in agriculture in the Central Valley. Former chairman of the Almond Board of California, California League of Food Processors, trustee at UC Merced. Is that right?
You know, I've never gone to one of those meetings. So.
All right. And a former board member at the Westlands Water District. You did go to those meetings. Yes, right, exactly.
I attended those.
Right. So we're very, very happy to have Stewart here. And Peter Gleick, of course, probably many of you know, is co-founder and president of the Pacific Institute in Oakland, renowned as a leading expert, innovator, and communicator on water and climate issues. He's a MacArthur Fellow and a member of the U.S. Academy of Sciences. So very happy to have both Stewart and Peter here to talk about the California Water Bond, which we'll all soon be making some decisions on. I think both Peter and Stewart have some opening remarks. I'll turn it over to Peter first. He has some very nice graphics taken from a report that I think was released today by the Pacific Institute. So let me start with Peter.
Okay, well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out here. If you're looking for fireworks, you may not get the fireworks that we didn't have a pro and a con on that last panel. It's not clear we have a pro and a con on this panel. The Pacific Institute, which I direct in Oakland, just actually this morning released our assessment of Prop 1. We're neutral. The Institute doesn't typically take positions on legislation anyway. We're neutral on the bond. My friends all ask me my position on the bond, and I'm sort of hoping that by the end of the evening I'll have made up my mind. Because honestly, I haven't. There is material out there that describes the bond and the language, the arcane language. We'll get into the subtleties here. I would note that we had some conversation about this beforehand, but I didn't get the blue jean memo.
It's a farmer.
So anyway, before we start, I want to ask if you've already made up your mind on the bond, yes or no, raise your hand. Okay, so actually about less than half of you have made up your mind one way or the other about the bond. How do we make up our minds about these propositions in California? Careful research. We read the language of these propositions, we do the research, and we figure out what they say, and then we vote. That's one option. A second option is the day of the election, we've saved all of our mail, and we look at who's for it and who's against it, And if you're a member of one of those groups, that helps you. Okay. The third option is you just read the little short summary that the Secretary of State writes on the ballot, and you try and figure out what that says, and then you vote. Or our underlying beliefs and preferences play a role as well. About those underlying beliefs, so I wanted to make a couple of comments about those. That might drive the yes or no decision that some of you have already made. I'm going to vote for the bond because it's going to help because we're having a terrible, terrible drought. No, I'm not going to vote for the bond because it doesn't have anything to do with the drought. Yes, I'm going to vote for the bond because I don't care what it says, but we've got to do something about water because we fight about water all the time, and let's just spend some money. No, I'm never going to vote for the bond because I don't like the idea of big bonds, and especially big general revenue bonds, which this is. Yes, I'm going to vote for the bond because I always vote for big general revenue bonds because the state ought to be investing more in infrastructure and the kinds of things that the state ought to be investing in. No, I'm not going to vote for the bond because we have to stop subsidizing storage. And that's just what the bond must be for, because the Republicans voted for it in the legislature. Yes, I'm going to vote for the bond because we need more storage. No, I'm not going to vote for the bond because it must be full of pork, because otherwise, how could you get the legislators to vote for it, and how could they expect the public to vote for it? So, okay. So we have you understand my problem here. All of these things sort of have a bit of truth to it. But, so can we get the slides? I have two slides. One is just a bunch of images, pro and con.
There you go.
So yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. They're 3 and 3. I was even. And the next slide. So it's $7.5 billion. It's $14 billion over the lifetime if you include the interest that we have to pay back. So it's an investment of some kind. There's a lot of money for a lot of different things. And this just gives you a little bit of a flavor. But the biggest amount of money, $2.7 billion, is for storage. Storage. Surface and groundwater storage. And maybe we'll come back to that in the Q&A. But there's money for watershed protection and restoration. And I don't completely agree with the first panel. They've already left. They've decided how they're going to vote about the bond. They said none of that money can be used for the Delta Tunnel projects, the BDCP. But there's money for restoration of wetlands, which is part of the whole debate about the Delta. There's money for improving groundwater and surface water quality. There's quite a bit of money for what we call disadvantaged communities in the Central Valley that don't have access to safe water and sanitation right now. There's some money, not a whole lot, but there's some money for flood protection. So a little bit of the money for everybody in this thing is part of what's going on here. A couple of other quick conclusions. The money will not help the drought, the current drought. If you're voting for the bond only because you think we got to do something about the drought, I do have an opinion about that. None of this money is going to be spent quickly. It might help prevent serious drought impacts 10 or 20 years from now, but not immediately on the ground. I'm going to stop there because I think the conversation back and forth will be interesting. There are a lot of subtleties. Let me say one thing about storage. The way the bond is written, it's $2.7 billion for surface or groundwater storage, and only for the public benefits of that storage. I believe that the Republicans who voted for the bond in the legislature believe that money's going to go for surface storage projects, reservoirs. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think those couple of surface water storage projects that are being debated have serious problems on their own. And I think there's a lot of ambiguity that we don't know yet. And the one conclusion we came to in this analysis was the real impacts of the bond, if it passes, will be felt only once the decisions are made later about how this money's actually allocated and spent. And let me leave it at that.
Could I, before, you're doing a nice job summarizing what the bond is, could you maybe shed a little light on the process that'll be in place to decide what actually gets funded?
Sure. That's also complicated, but there are lots of pieces to it. The storage money, the $2.7 billion, will be allocated by something called the California Water Commission, which is 9 members appointed by the governor. Nine. They've been around since the 70s, and this may be a bit of an exaggeration. They've not really had anything to do until now. If the bond passes, they're going to have a lot to do. They have to make decisions about how to spend $2.7 billion, how to define public benefits from these projects, and then how to rank them when projects are brought to them, and this money will be theirs to give away. Other money will go to the Department of Water Resources, which will allocate the money based on competitive bond projects, as they typically do. Some goes to the Department of Fish and Wildlife for ecosystem restoration. There are lots of different pots of money, and they go to different pieces. And so that's part of this question about allocation. We won't really know, if the bond passes, what the benefits of the bond money will be until the decisions are made about the projects that these things will fund, and until those projects are implemented.
Great, very good, thank you. Stuart, some opening remarks.
Yeah, well, this is so unfair. And are there any questions? Okay, so just a little bit about, so I'm a farmer in Westlands, primarily in Westlands. We have some properties outside of the district. But we are, we saw the chart earlier with all the outflows and the amount that would go south of the Delta. There's a tendency, I think, to kind of lump, all of agriculture and all the growers all together. And really, whenever I get in a room with a group of my fellow farmers, and usually they stand up and say, the first thing we have to do is ensure that we protect, the priority rights among, rights holders. And when you realize you're the lowest priority rights holder in the room, and everybody's, absolutely, we're going to do that. I'm in Westlands. We are some of the lowest priority rights users kind of anywhere. And so when we have a shortfall in a tight year like this, or even in a normal year, we've over the course of time have watched our water reliability just perpetually shrink and get smaller and smaller. And this is a drought year, and so we start every season thinking we're going to get next to nothing in terms of our surface water supplies. And I have to say, actually, the state and the feds have actually delivered against that thought. So, but we've tried to prepare by we've invested. The other day I calculated, I think I have 15,000 miles of drip irrigation in the ground right now. I know we've bought enough to wrap around the globe. We're spending the money, and we're conserving, and we're doing the right things, and we're purposely not over planting into permanent crops. We're managing our resources as tightly as we can because, quite frankly, we just don't know how much we're going to get in any one given year. So when I'm in that room with all these growers and I realize, well, wait a second, some of the guys here in parts of the state that have senior rights, and typically if you have senior rights, you generally pay less than those that have less senior rights. You realize, not everybody in here meters their water. Not everybody in here manages their water. not everybody in here knows what their water use efficiency is per crop, per acre, per whatever. And it's amazing to me that we live in this fantastic state and we have this water issue. But this isn't true just for agriculture. This is true for, I think, a lot of municipalities. It's true for a lot of us using water in the state. So I'm generally a supporter of the water bond because I think it's focusing some money, not because the drought's the drought, but I think because it's trying to focus some money towards some conservation issues, some recycling, the various things that are up here. And I was talking to Peter beforehand. I'm not a crazy avid supporter of this because, just as Peter was saying, when you get down into the fine print, and I am just a farmer, so the minute it says refer to this title or this, that, the other thing, I start getting lost, and then just what you said, I start looking at, well, who is supporting this? And kind of lean that way. But I think it holds the promise, I believe, in this state we need. I believe we do need to continue to invest in the infrastructure. You're absolutely right. It will require over the bond's life, payments, and it's a far bigger number. But I think almost any investment that we really make, it's not a one-time hit. And one thing that gets lost, I think, that we fail to talk about and if we had a really good ag economist around, what the benefits are of the investments. And so, anyway, I'm a tepid supporter.
Very good. So on that note, with respect to benefits, does California need more storage? You first.
Well, I believe it does. I think for me, the number one issue really is addressing the delta and getting the health of the delta addressed. Because I think if we have a healthy delta, I probably have a greater shot at getting water transported through those pumps and to us. And so I think that's critical. But I look at storage as kind of like a savings account. And you could argue that just filling up a big bowl of water and once you have it filled and it spills and what have you, there's not an awful lot of new water. The flip side, this is like a savings account that maybe you're not going to earn a lot on your savings, but when you need it and you have to draw down, whether it's for the environment, whether it's for ag use or municipal use or whatever, I think I'd feel better having a savings account. And I think our snowpack's only going to get smaller from what I can tell. I think the sea levels are going to go up. So for me, I'm more focused on the delta, but I would gladly take some storage.
Peter?
So I think all of California's water problems would be solved if every farmer were like Stewart. I'm serious.
Well, that concludes this evening, right?
And we can come back. We can go back to the broader. We're supposed to talk about Prop 1 for at least mostly, but we can talk about broader water policy maybe in that context. Mm-hmm. The question, do we need more storage, is a trick question. The short answer is yes, sure. But the real question is, what kind of storage, where, and who pays for it? We have a tremendous amount of storage in California. We've built more surface storage reservoirs per unit of water that flows in an average year than almost any other place in the world. And there are no more good places to build surface storage. Maybe one or two, and if we build them, we'll build them, and we'll spend the money, and our problems will be the same as they are today. That won't solve our problem. But we also have the potential to develop a tremendous amount of groundwater storage, because we've overpumped our groundwater massively, especially in the San Joaquin and the southern San Joaquin. Even in a good year, not in a drought year, but even in a good year, we overpump groundwater, and groundwater levels continue to drop, and that's unsustainable. If we don't solve that problem somehow, we're heading for dry pumps. We have this in this year already. So the ability to recharge groundwater in wet years is a really important storage answer, and I'm a big fan of that. And the $2.7 billion is written in a way for surface or groundwater storage. It's a little ambiguous, and maybe that's a good thing. But the projects that are brought forward and we ultimately fund, if they're surface storage projects, I think that money may go down the tubes and not help us. If it's groundwater storage, that might be a real effective solution. Who pays, though? And this gets to this question I hinted at the beginning. Is a general revenue bond the right way to do this? Or should the users, should there be a user fee? And again, we have a great economist here. Should there be a statewide user fee on water that supports some of these projects? We have one on energy that funds all sorts of great things statewide. It's 50 cents a month or something on our energy bill. It's really small. Should the beneficiaries of storage projects pay rather than the state, the general taxpayer, which is what this is? I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that.
Could I get your take on that, Stuart? Is this, even if storage is needed for the state, is this the best way to finance it?
Well, you know, I look at this and I think, okay, I think everybody should be paying more for water, number one. You're really going to like this one. Particularly, you know, and Spreck, I think, you know, like Hetchy, isn't that like 30 grand a year to rent? You pay to the Park Service for a Hetchy, the
Yeah, it's the price of a rundown one-bedroom apartment.
yeah, so, which, you know, so I think we're all part of like, you know, are we not pricing water appropriately, you know, whether it's just a farm issue or not. So I think if we look at this as, you know, this is a collective good, a collective resource that we're all trying to figure out how to manage, you know, I think you have to tie a user fee, or a user has to pay, has to have skin in the game, if you will, for them to really step up and make the investments in conservation and what have you. But I do think there's also, you know, there's a public good here that, you know, also has to be addressed. So if we're spending money on the environment, we're spending money on, you know, all these different things that is beneficial to all of us, and I think we all have a stake in the game. And I think this is a role that government, is an appropriate role for government to play to help fund some projects that may be difficult to fund privately or individually. I'd love the idea of having Los Angeles pay for anything. I'm good with that. But, you know, I think we all have, so for example, if the city of San Francisco was going to figure out a way to handle its effluent and its stormwater and somehow recharge it back into the ground as opposed to pumping it out in the ocean. As a guy in Fresno looking at the broader picture, I think I would be comfortable paying some share of that. I do think the people of San Francisco should also be paying, those users should be paying. So I think it's a combination. Mm-hmm. I love the idea of groundwater storage, and you know, I think it'd be great to figure out an area that's being overdrafted, that had a canal, that you could put water in it, and they could put water out there. And that would be right around my farm. No, you know, one of the issues that we really are kind of figuring out now, and south of the Delta, where we are lower priority water users, and our water supply is really variable. There's about half of the agriculture in California, I'm told this by the guys that sell drip tape, has drip. And we have a lot of it in the southern part of the valley. Not all of it, but we have a lot. And one of the problems we're having right now is we realize we're doing a very good job of producing more with less. This is a great thing. But we're not recharging. And so we've put all this drip out, and then right now the other problem we have is we're not getting the surface water to kind of flush the salt. So what salts we have in the groundwater are now going right in, you know, our drip lines. And we're not spreading salt evenly over the ground to grow these crops. And we're concentrating them just where the seeds are. And it's a really tough thing. And we've actually had groups come out, sustainable conservation, and they were actually talking about, you guys got to figure out a way to start flood irrigating again to recharge. And it's a tricky issue for us. But I think groundwater storage, without spending a lot of money on it, should be doable if you can convey it through the delta.
I would note the money for storage is for public benefits portion, defined in ways that remain to be seen. Ecosystem restoration, recreation, flood control, a set of public benefits. It can't pay for the other parts of the storage. Those will have, somebody's going to have to figure out how to pay for those. And one of the reasons why we have mixed feelings about the storage component of this is because I'm not convinced that those projects will pencil out anyway, that they'll be cost effective, that they'll produce enough water to provide any additional real benefits. Whereas groundwater, I think groundwater storage could.
Which I want to get back to the topic of incentives and who pays for this. But with respect to surface storage projects, understanding that none of them may move forward, which ones do you think are the most likely to move forward with financing like this?
Okay, so what it says is the projects eligible are the CalFed Record of Decision projects, surface storage projects, which are Shasta, some in-delta storage, a dam called Temperance Flat, which is a dam squeezed on the San Joaquin River in between two existing dams. Sites Reservoir, which is an off-stream storage project proposed for the north of the Delta off the Sacramento River. It's off of the river. They pump water off the river and fill it up, and then when they want it, they pump it back to the river. Those are the ones that are in the surface storage projects that are most likely. In fact, and Raising Shasta. Did I mention Raising Shasta? Okay. Raising Shasta is in fact ruled out. Did you get the language? Okay. I forgot to bring the actual language of the bond because it's so arcane it would have been fun to read. But if you actually dig down, I think Raising Shasta is prohibitive because it says you're not allowed to fund projects that would violate the Wild and Scenic River Act's law, and Raising Shasta would do that. I think the most likely, I don't think any of them are likely, surface storage. I think the most likely is Sites Reservoir, the off-stream storage north of the Delta. But here's an important additional point. You can build more storage. That's one question. But can you find the water to fill it? There's no more new water, really, in California. Sites Reservoir might store 1 million acre-feet or so, but if you calculate how much new water it would produce that could be reallocated for ecosystems or farmers or cities or whatever, it's like 100,000 acre-feet. And it's a multi-billion-dollar project. It's a lot of money for not a lot of water. And you'll notice there's $100 million here for water conservation and efficiency, which there's some other literature from the Institute. We did some analysis of the potential for conservation and efficiency, for wastewater reuse, which Stuart mentioned, for stormwater capture. You can get a lot more water for a lot less money if you're not focusing on storage, which dominates our conversation. But in fact, think about conservation and efficiency and stormwater capture and reuse and wastewater reuse in the urban sectors. There are other things that we ought to be doing, and yet we focus on storage because that's what we did last century.
So let me, since you brought up recycling and stormwater capture, let me just follow up on that a little bit. Those are topics with a lot of other urban water supply alternatives that the Pacific Institute has done research on for years. And there's some money in the bond that would support those activities. But what about all this use of taxpayer funds to finance projects like that? Even for things like recycling, doesn't that ultimately send the wrong signal to water consumers?
Yes. So it's this question of who pays.
Right.
I do think there are things that we ought to pay for with general revenues. Certain public benefits, ecosystem restoration, where you can't identify who caused the ecosystem harm, which maybe we better charge them. But certainly for things like fixing your pipes in the street, improving the reliability of municipal deliveries, building local wastewater treatment systems and reuse systems, that's what I pay a water bill for. I pay a lot in my water bill. I get Ed Mud water. I'm paying, if you calculate my water supply and my wastewater bill, it's like $3,000 an acre foot. That's appropriate. I ought to be paying for the services that I get, plus the amount of money that the water district's got to sock away for the broken pipe a year from now, or the expansion and upgrading of the infrastructure. That's the user benefit. I ought to pay for that. We ought to pay for that. So that may not be an appropriate use for bond money, for general taxpayer money. That's part of my ambiguous feeling.
And what does that say? I mean, we do this in energy, as you mentioned. What does that say about the wisdom of a public goods charge for water?
Okay, so a public goods charge for water would be a little fee charged to every user on the basis of how much water they use, typically on volumetric, but perhaps on how much water they use. I think that's a really good idea. But I agree, we should all be paying more for water. Price signals are really important, and the Institute's always supported smart economics for that. The question, though, is then what's that money used for?
Right.
You build up a public goods charge, you don't necessarily use it to fix the pipes in the street outside my house.
Mm-hmm.
You do use it for ecosystem restoration, for some of these fixes in the Delta, for some of the damages that our water system policies have caused over the last 100 years that are truly public benefits. And that's a debate about what you choose to spend it on, but that's what my preference would be.
Good. So I want to leave some time for questions. Let me ask just one more of our two panelists. Do you think that the water bond is enough to make a definitive long-term difference in California's water system? Start with you, Stuart.
Well, I think time will tell. I mean, if you really don't know, I mean, walking through the bond and looking at how this stuff's going to get implemented, what kind of impact, I think it's a hard thing to answer that. I don't think the water bond by itself is any silver bullet. You know, this is just another step in addressing these issues. But, you know, just going back to the pricing and cost of water, you know, what's crazy about water is that it commands so many different values. And the water that we're drinking here, you know, you're probably paying close to $1 million an acre foot when you figure out the cost of a bottle. And, you know, what we're paying in agriculture, it varies from our pumping rates to what water we do get out of the system, which today, you know, if we were getting water out of Westlands delivered to our fields, we're in the $200 to $300 an acre foot price level. For incremental water this past year, we paid up to a couple $1,000s an acre foot. But this is a item of cost in something that we're producing, which is something far different than I don't know, somebody watering their golf course or whatever, you know, and what people are willing to pay and how they pay it, I think, is part of the incredible water picture. I mean, I understand Oprah right now is spending, I don't know, something like 50 grand a week or whatever to keep her lawn green in Santa Barbara, while others are dying. So I don't think we have a good market mechanism to really price in terms of quality, reliability. Water that's not of high quality, that's not reliable, is not worth as much.
Peter?
So I don't normally do this, but I'll just read the last sentence or so on our bond summary. If the bond passes, voters should not expect immediate relief from Proposition 1 for the impacts of the current drought, nor should they expect these funds to be the last investment that's needed for better institutions, smarter planning, and more effective water management strategies. It can at best be a down payment on our water future. It's a piece of the puzzle. it's not going to solve our water problems whether it passes. It's not going to bring the state down if it doesn't pass. We have a lot to do statewide to get our water system under better control. And this is, at best, a piece of that puzzle.
That's what I said. You just said it better. Yeah, it was-
That's what he said.
yeah.
Good. All right, we have some time for questions, so please.
So you all made it. Oh, before we get to them. So, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, because you hadn't decided, have any of you
How could they decide?
decided? Raise your hand if you actually have made a decision in the last hour.
All right,
Okay,
all right, we did some
we
good.
did our job.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, sure.
So you mentioned the need for increased storage, and I know that San Vicente Reservoir near San Diego is being raised right now. So would any funding from Proposition 1 go towards that, or is that completely separate?
It is possible that raising existing reservoirs or building new kinds of infrastructure at existing reservoirs to help them could qualify for this kind of money. That's actually a great question. So they just did a really good project at Folsom Dam, which is right upstream of Sacramento, not with state money, but with Folsom, with the local district money. They built the spillway bigger so that they could spill water out of Folsom faster. Now that's really important for a lot of reasons, it turns out. It means they could fill Folsom higher than normal because they know that if a big flood starts to come, they can empty the reservoir quicker and it's better for flood control. And because they can fill the reservoir higher, they don't have to leave it quite as empty for flood storage. They have more of a supply. It's a bigger piece of the bank. So the possibility of reoperating existing reservoirs, and we have lots of existing reservoirs, is a plausible thing without building new storage, without damming new rivers, without overpumping more groundwater. That is a possibility.
Good.
Hi, thanks for the panel. So I am looking at this chart while you're talking, and the numbers are so large, and then you filled this in that the letter of the law does not prescribe exactly which projects will be funded and how. There will be a series of discretionary decisions and committee meetings and whatever. So isn't it the case that a vote for this proposition is in effect a vote for the leadership and committee power structure in place now? You're sort of giving them your consent to make a lot of decisions about a lot of money, not we're making decisions about where this money is getting spent. Does that make sense? And if that's the case, what do you think about the committees and power structure that's in place to make these decisions?
I think that's a very astute observation, really. I think that's right. Now, the California Water Commission has a certain amount of time to develop the criteria to figure out what's a public benefit and what kinds of projects will happen. And over that period of time, there's going to be a change in the membership of the California Water Commission. Some of the people are going to step down, and there are going to be new appointees by the governor. So I don't know who's going to be on. I know who's on them now. I don't know who's going to ultimately be making those decisions. But yes, we're in a sense, maybe we do this all the time anyway, but we're basically saying, okay, we the public think it's important to spend this money, and we're going to trust you guys to make the decisions. The Sacramento Bee came out and in favor of Prop 1. Their editorial came out in favor of Prop 1, but it was pretty lukewarm. And really what they said was, we think this is important, but if Prop 1 passes, we're going to pay a lot of attention to how it's implemented. And I think a lot of the groups that are supporting it are also a little lukewarm and are saying to themselves the same thing. We're going to have to pay a lot of attention to how this is ultimately implemented if the voters say yes.
But as you said, I mean, this is true with probably everything you'll ever vote for, right? I mean, at the end of the day, whatever we vote for you never know exactly how it's going to get implemented, or or what it's going to cost, or
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
Yeah. My question was, how different is this structure? We have a lot of water structure in California, a lot of water infrastructure. Is this the first time we've done this with a general revenue bond? So is this a trend in terms of how we deal with environmental problems, that we're going to float money out of our own pockets? Or is this a continuation in a pattern we've seen before?
The full analysis of the bond that we've put on our website talks about that. There have been lots of previous water bonds, I think 14 previous water bonds. This would be the fourth largest, not even the largest, the fourth largest. The State Water Project, Oroville, one of the two big aqueducts, a lot of the other big dams, were built with state bond money. It's not uncommon. A lot of the infrastructure, some of our infrastructure is local, some of it's federal, some of it's state. So it's not that different. And in fact, actually, if there is a big difference, it's that this bond, more than some of those previous bonds, does have money for wetlands restoration and for wastewater treatment and reuse, and some of the, I would argue, 21st century solutions. It's not $7.5 billion for dams, which is what some of the old bonds were.
that'd be great.
You mentioned how there's no new water in California, and I was wondering if you could address the implications of studies that have found that there's been 5 to 7 times of over allocation of the water in California, especially with regard to Prop 1 and the potential for new storage.
Well, this is what Stewart was talking about earlier, about water rights. We've given away, as you point out, by some estimates, 5 to 7 times the amount of water in water rights than the state actually ever produces in natural hydrology. But that's a little bit misleading in the sense that that's the water rights situation, and junior water right holders know that in a drought they're going to get shorted, and that's been Stewart's. But one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of the Westlands Water District in general. I'm a big fan of Stewart's. And the Westlands Water District is far more efficient on average than water districts with senior water rights, for reasons Stewart's mentioned. They pay less, they get all the water even in a drought year they want, whereas Westlands doesn't. They have to make do, they have to be efficient. And that's the water rights allocation scheme that we have. So that's just the reality. I don't think Prop 1 doesn't change that. I think there's a little bit of wishful thinking that if we build reservoirs, there will be water to fill them, and we could squeeze a little more out of the system. I'm glad I wasn't on the panel, the first panel.
I'd like to add to this a little bit, because I just have a different perspective. Now, keep in mind, I'm a farmer, okay? So cut me some slack. But you look at the state of California, it's about, I think in terms of acres and everything, right? It's about 100 million acres. And when you think in terms of, the amount of water that comes in, and I think annually, the annual precip is something like around 180, 200 million acre feet, plus or minus. And a lot of it gets lost to evaporation, seepage, what have you. And you think about, we're not really irrigating the mountains directly, or the beaches, or the deserts, or you work it all out. And agriculture in the state, right now there's about 8 million acres of irrigated agriculture, so about 8% of the state. And, we were looking at a chart earlier showing the flows through the delta. And you looked at those, the flows are like this, and then there's these lines. So there's, on an average year, there's over 20 million, I think over 20 million acre feet of water that flows through the delta. It's an estuary, and you've got to keep the salt water out and everything. But every time I think through those numbers, and I think through the low priority ag users south of the delta, there's about just a shy less than 3 million acres. If those guys were able to get another acre foot of their contracts, I think a lot of those farmers and everything would be okay. So when I look at the total picture and I know these numbers are not 100% accurate, I believe that there's got to be a way for us to figure out how to better manage this water to the benefit of all Californians and the environment and all that kind of stuff. And so, and it's a renewable resource. It does go through cycles, but generally I go skiing every year in the Sierras, and because there's usually snow there. Now, maybe there won't be in the future, but
Yeah, get your skiing in now.
yeah. But I think it's in periods of drought we look at it as really focus on an allocation issue, and we're kind of in this lifeboat and who's going to get kicked out and everything. I think we got to figure out how we all stay in the boat. And I don't know. When I look at the numbers, I think that's doable.
My turn? Okay. So other than state revolving fund fiasco that it is, where else do we see $500 million going to water and sanitation projects for low and disenfranchised communities? And do you think those earmarks would be an equal fiasco, or that could actually happen?
I like the money in the bond for the disadvantaged communities. We estimate there's 600 or 700 million potentially. Partly I trust the organizations in the Central Valley who work on those projects who like that money and think it'll be allocated to good things. I don't know, but I think that's one of the more attractive pieces of this. We need to refill the state revolving loan fund. We need to meet basic needs for some of the poorest communities that are drinking water with nitrates. And I think this money could be critical for that.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've got a couple quick thoughts, and you can pick and choose which ones you want to answer, if any of them. There's an analogy with traffic planning when people talk about solving traffic congestion by widening roadways, that it's like loosening your belt to lose weight. And I'm wondering if that's a similar analogy with adding storage. One other thing I want to think related to storage is that rainwater harvesting to me is storage. It's just decentralized, small-scale storage. And I'm wondering what the definition of storage here with that $2.5 billion, if that could go to, rain barrels for people, or storage and new development projects and things like that. So does it have to be big centralized projects? And then finally, I'm just wondering about crops and how much water we export to China or other places through our crop exports, and what if they had to pay more if the water was leaving the United States, for those kind of crops?
Do you want to take the last one first?
Yeah, honestly, I grew up thinking that California exporting goods has always been a good thing. I know recently the almond industry in particular, they're talking about exports to China. When I was chairman of the almond board, I went to China. They were importing a million pounds. We got them up to about 300 million pounds, and they're now down to about 150. Because the Chinese, they don't like paying top dollar. So prices have gone up because of the drought and what have you. So, but an almond, well, I'm not going to go into the whole almond tree thing, but by volume, by weight, what have you, the vast majority of the almond crop by weight is in hull, it's in shell, it goes into the dairy feed, all this kind of stuff. So the actual almond meat, relatively speaking, is not that big a deal. But we're the most productive growers of a lot of these crops anywhere in the world. And I think we should, as in California, if we can export technology, if we can export the salmon we're catching, I think this, and it's bringing revenue to our state, I think that's a great thing. I think it's a fantastic thing. The notion that maybe we shouldn't be exporting out of California, I mean, I'm assuming you're saying beyond agricultural crops, I think's crazy. But I think a better question is, when you look at California and the crops that are grown here on this 8 million acres, should we be focused on higher value crops that generate more return per acre foot? And the thing that always blows my mind, and I can't figure this out, pistachios, we earn quite a bit per acre foot, almonds, processing tomatoes. Then you get down, in this state, we still grow about 2.5 million acres of alfalfa, silage, all these crops that are real low value crops that are fairly water intensive that go into the dairy shed. You know where this is all leading? You got to drink more almond milk. So, to me, that's really, I sit around, I look at the crops that we're growing, and we look at our return per acre foot, our limiting factor. It's not our return per capital dollar spent. And yet I sit in these rooms with these guys that are growing really low-value crops using a lot of water. And I'm not picking on them, but generally they're, they have senior water rights. They don't pay as much, and it just kind of works.
I can't believe this.
I know.
Stuart and I are going to go on the road together. Because if I were to sit here and say to anybody, we really ought to rethink the crops we grow. The farmers ought to not be growing these low-value, water-intensive crops. I'm wearing a tie. I'd get hung up. But Stuart,
trust me.
Stuart can say it because he's a farmer.
You can say it in Berkeley, you can't say it in President.
Yeah. Not in Tulare County with the dairies.
Let me actually add one thing to this footprint question. The Pacific Institute actually did a study last year. We did a comprehensive water footprint for the state. We looked at the water required in total to produce all of the goods and services that we produce in California. Food, semiconductors, everything. Minus the water that we export in the goods and services we export, plus the water that we import in the goods and services that we import. That's the total water footprint of California. We import more water than we export, virtual water, in the goods and services that we import. We import more water from China than we export water to China. So it doesn't bother me at all. I agree completely. These are high-valued exports. This brings money and revenue and jobs to California. There's a question about what we choose to spend that water on, but I think if you look at the big picture, I think we're trying to do the right things. The answer is no on I think small-scale rainwater harvesting would not be eligible for this kind of money. But there is money in some of the local watershed categories. Is that listed up? That could be used for rainwater harvesting, for stormwater capture, just not the storage money.
Very good.
Yeah, and there were a couple of times I heard the word trust, and a couple of times I heard the word public, but I haven't heard them together there with water. Public trust. I had heard that water was a public trust resource, not just a renewable resource or something like that, which sort of translates into doesn't the public own it? And I heard Peter say that that he used water rights and reality in the same sentence, and I mean, is there anything real about this water rights system, or should water law be enforced as it is, not how people want it to be? I think this just, the whole question of, isn't this an endorsement of the people in power now making decisions where we don't know what it's, I mean, in terms of the water bond, don't you think it's more responsible not to give these irresponsible people more toys?
Yeah.
I mean, for the
So
public.
Michael, you know more about the public trust than almost anyone. I agree completely. There are very serious unresolved statewide legal and institutional questions about how we deal with the public trust definition of water in California. You know, we made progress years ago and then it sort of stopped, as you know. I don't know the extent to which a mechanism like this, like the bond, can or can't solve those kinds of problems or make them worse. But obviously, through your filter, that's an important question there.
Well, to a large extent, people are buying their own water back, and
Yeah.
that is not addressed, and, in the conversation.
Well, we did try and bring it up in the sense of, should general revenue bonds be used to pay for fixing some of the damages to the ecosystems and the public trust values that you're describing, caused by previous decisions and earlier water users? I think that's a perfectly legitimate question to ask, and it's a tough one to answer.
I think we got time for one more here.
This is a very, very ignorant question, but so you look at like medicine, and there's trials for new drugs or something. How do you innovate in water use? And are there like say gray water? Are there ways that you can use gray water to flood the fields that you're talking about, or how does that happen? It seems like these things get set up, and if a button's going to be pushed, it's going to be pushed in this completely massive way. And can you say what I'm saying? Because you're shaking your head up and down. I know you can answer this question better than I can.
Okay, I'm going to take my moderator hat off just for a second. I can't resist. That was too good of a question. As an economist, the first thing my mind goes to when you talk about innovation and transformation in the water sector is pricing, right? We don't price water as if it's scarce right now. When you pay your water bill, whether you're in East Bay Mud or Berkeley or San Francisco, anywhere, when you pay your water bill, what are you paying for? You're paying for conveyance, treatment, pressurization, distribution. Quality. You're not paying quality. You're not paying anything for the water itself, right? And so until we start to price water at its actual cost, we'll be consuming too much. Water's just like, in that sense, any other commodity that we have in the marketplace. People respond to price signals in predictable ways. When water gets expensive in Marin, where I live, or in Westlands, where Stewart is farming, people get creative. They start to use water in different ways. Conservation becomes a priority. All kinds of technologies that may have existed on the shelf are now ones that pencil out, that can actually be adopted. So the first thing that I would go to answer that question would be pricing. That we really have in the United States water that's way too cheap, in some places not even metered, not even measured, right? There are parts of California that until fairly recently, even urban areas like Sacramento, Fresno, didn't have water meters. It's unbelievable. But that to me would be the first thing we could do to really spur some meaningful innovation in the water sector.
I would add one. I agree with that, and one of the reasons why when Stewart describes the things that he's doing on his farm, is he's paying a lot more for water than somebody with a senior water right. So that's absolutely an important piece of this. Another piece, though, is crisis. We have groundwater law now for the first time because of the drought, and because we have had a strong Democratic legislature that was willing to push it through, and a governor that supported it, and organizations all across the political spectrum who came together to say it's time to do groundwater because it's a crisis. The Australia example, which was hinted at in the first session, they had a very bad drought starting in the year 2000, and it went for a year, and then 2 years, and then 3 years. And they sort of did what we're doing. They muddled through. And then it was 9 years. And at the end of 9 years, they were innovating institutionally. They revamped their water rights laws. They set public trust guidelines for ecosystem restoration. They bought back water from farmers. Their urban water use is a fraction of our urban water use today here in California, and we think we're efficient. So crisis is also, we do things. If it starts raining tomorrow and rains hard, I think the potential to do even more than we've done in the last year or so is going to dry up.
Yeah, right. It's good.
Sorry.
Okay. On that note.
I'd like to thank our panel. You all did a great job. And if one closing thought, since you didn't really tell people how to vote in a very effective way, how can they figure it out between now and November 4th?
I don't like to tell people how to vote. Although if I knew how to vote, I might say so. Read our analysis, see who's supporting it, read their arguments, think about the values and the arguments you heard tonight, and whatever you do, vote. Vote, no matter what. Vote.
I'd say hold your nose, vote, and hope for the best.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for coming, and please come back November 5th and bring your friends and hear about Mono Lake, the San Joaquin River, and the restoration of Hetchy and Yosemite National Park. Thank you.